had the rare pleasure of knowing our next speaker intimately. He's such a good friend of our family. We've known him for a very, very long time. David McCann is going to come out in a moment, and we're going to have a conversation that you're all going to be a witness to. I know how the conversation ends, and in the many years that we've known David, it's only been recently that he's even revealed so much of the story you're about to hear to all of us. And at my urging and at my request, I asked if he would find the courage to come and sit on this stage and tell the story and share it with all of you. He's an incredible person. If you look at the headlines today and what's happening in the news, we know that thousands of victims have come forward and have been victimized by the Catholic Church scandal. We've seen hit Hollywood films about the topic. We have a very Canadian story and a very Canadian hero attached to it. And I'm so proud of him for doing this. And if you would please welcome him and joining the stage, Mr. David McCann.
Hey, old man.
Good morning. Nice setup here. How are you?
Not used to doing this. A little bit sad that I have to be here, actually, and that we're hearing so many stories like this nowadays.
This is your first time ever on the TED stage, isn't it? You've never done this before?
No.
This is a really difficult story for you, so you take your time with it, and I appreciate you doing it. Talk to me about, let's go back in time. You're an old man.
He's a friend, he thinks. You're not in my will, by the way. I just got cut out.
You're 12 years old. You're in Ontario. I've known you at this part of your life. Tell all of us a little bit about when it happened. You were 12 years old. If you can, tell the story.
I was 12 years old, juvenile delinquent, truant. Loved to go and sit in the library instead of going to school in Kingston. And a judge, against the advice of my teachers and a psychiatrist, sent me to a school run by the Christian Brothers to give me discipline and purpose in life, I guess. I arrived at the school really late in the day, was escorted directly from the front door to the dormitory, given an iron cot, an itchy old wool blanket, and told to go to sleep. I cried myself to sleep. It was the first time in my life I'd ever spent a night away from my family, and 3 hours drive away. I was woken a couple of hours later by a Christian brother dressed in a black robe and a white collar. He took me to a room outside the dormitory and raped me. It was the first of many instances of that. In the 2 years that I was in that school, I saw brothers savagely beat children, some of them unconscious. It was not a nice place to be.
So the most horrible thing that I think anybody here can imagine happens to you. You're 12 years old, and this will now, for the rest of your life, and I know this story, so I want to help them go through this because this is an extraordinary series of events. But before it gets to something special, you become 14. 2 years goes by. Talk to me about the word loneliness. What does the word loneliness mean to you?
I've been away from my family for 2 years. They've only come to visit me once. They didn't have the money to come and visit. I moved back home, but I moved into a one-room summer cottage on the shores of Lake Ontario, a 30-minute drive away from my parents' house, and I lived there for a couple of years by myself, going to high school. Basically, just living alone, living away from people. Didn't participate in team sports, didn't participate in stuff in school. Mandated by the government that I go to school. If I didn't go to school, I'd have been sent back. It's affected my entire life as it does most victims of child abuse. You carry it with you, and especially when you're younger, you don't integrate it into your life. Most of us lock it away in a room and never sit back, and you never think about it. You think, what the hell did I do at 12 years old to deserve that? what did I do wrong in my life that made somebody do that to me? What kind of punishment is that you inflict? And it took 30 years before the doors finally opened and I started to explore those issues.
There's a loneliness. I mean, there's not a lot of 14-year-olds that are living on their own in a cabin somewhere. Talk to me about what's going through your mind. Do you think you're the only victim? How do you feel? When you look in the mirror, who is the boy you see after something like that happens?
I mean, you just look at somebody and you're just saying, okay, I've done something so bad in life that you don't want, you're not normal. You see the other kids going out there, you see them dating, you see all those things. And you just basically say there's something so horribly wrong with yourself that nobody who's normal would want to have anything really to do with you in terms of, I'm not saying I didn't have friends, I'm not saying I didn't do things, but I certainly didn't spend the time. I didn't go to family gatherings, I didn't go to family reunions, I didn't go to birthday parties and shit like that. I just never figured it out.
Did you tell anyone?
I told my mother shortly thereafter. She went to see a parish priest by the name of Father Walsh, and he threatened her with excommunication. And she basically said, piss on you, and took the entire family out of the church. And she converted. My father was a Roman Catholic. She was a high Anglican. She met him during the war. And she converted to Catholicism. So I found that out subsequently. I found that out years ago that she'd done that.
You're going to go from that point in your life, what sounds to anybody as a reasonable way to feel of just tragic low, to a moment where there is a catalyst for change. Because I know the David we're about to start talking about next. I know that David very well, and a lot of people know that David very well. But there had to have been a moment where there was change. What was the catalyst? What was the moment?
I'd been blessed in life that my safe haven was the written word. And I was meeting with a reporter for the Toronto Star, and I casually mentioned that during another conversation that just happened to come up, that there had been this abuse at that school. He did some research and eventually gave me a bunch of papers from that school that he pulled out of the Ontario archives. And when I read it, it was a report done by Don Sinclair in 1956, the year I was in school, for the Attorney General of Ontario and the Solicitor General of Ontario. And it was shared with the Archbishop of Ottawa and other church officials. They knew exactly what was going on, and they did everything in their power to make sure that it didn't become public. They didn't transfer many of the brothers, they left them in place, and provided no oversight. In other words, they didn't give a damn about the kids. And to me, it was, for me, the moment that I sat there, I had a rage that I never had in my life.
What are you thinking when you see this happening now? And it's in Ontario. What are you thinking?
I'm just thinking, it's how could you let that happen? I mean, you're the chief law enforcement officer, and your duty as the Attorney General and the duty as the Solicitor General, who's in charge of protecting people, you choose to protect your reputation over children, innocent children. And at that point in time, I can't explain how I felt. It was just inconceivable to me that somebody like Salle Brothers Sr., who had been a national hockey player, whose reputation in the National Hockey League was Mr. Clean, whose son I went to school with, for Christ's sakes, that man with that reputation would let children be abused for decades. And there's something inherently wrong with that. It's evil. But that, for me, was the turning point from pain to hope.
And so you and this reporter will now begin the work from where you started after this tragedy to what will become certainly the largest police investigation in Ontario history. God, David, that's just that in itself is where I think a lot of people go, good for you. He's not even done yet, because this is where it gets crazy. The fighter that I've always known, he then goes on and you sued the premier.
I was the first of 1,600 students from two schools, St. Joseph's and St. John's, that came forward in less than 2 years. It resulted in hundreds of charges against dozens and dozens of people, and they figured over 250 people would have been charged if they were still alive or were mentally competent enough to go to trial. And many of those were convicted. The person who abused me got 5 years in federal penitentiary.
How do you feel about that?
I wrote the courts and I said that's the wrong place to send them. Where do you send an 80-some-odd-year-old man? The church should have accepted responsibility. They should have put him under house arrest in a monastery, and the church should have absorbed part of that. I don't believe in vengeance. I believe in trying to change things. I believe in justice and reconciliation. And that's a journey that we took. I was privileged to lead the victims group, and very early on, within 2 months of this becoming public, we had the first of 26 suicides in the 2.5 years that I led that group. People trying to face the memories and the demons of the past and just couldn't do it. I'm sorry. When the first one happened, I realized that we'd had lawyers that said, let's sue the bastards, let's go to court. And I looked at it and I thought, if you take these people, having in my former job worked for various justice and NATO intelligence organizations, I knew what the court system was like. It's an abusive process. It's very confrontational, and they go into every part of your past and will bring it up as to why they shouldn't help you. And I said, there has to be a better way. And luckily we found a lawyer in Ottawa called Roger Tucker, and we started a process with the government, the church, to try and mediate a solution that would bring financial compensation, yes, but counseling, tattoo removal, medical, dental, educational benefits to the victims. We negotiated the first reconciliation agreement of its kind in the world. And attached to that agreement was the companion agreement, a 20-some-odd page document that talked only about apologies.
And so the apology now is the thing you're waiting for.
The apology is what I'm waiting for.
From who?
We wanted an apology from the Christian Brothers, from the Archdiocese of Ottawa and Toronto, and from the Government of Ontario. And I sued the Premier of Ontario because I wrote part of that. And it said the following: the Premier of the Province of Ontario will rise in the Ontario Legislature, and on behalf of the people of Ontario will deliver. And that day, Mike Harris went golfing. My understanding is with 3 executives from the Royal Bank of Canada. You son of a bitch. And I was so angry when they invited me. They sent me an invitation to come to the legislature to listen to another member of the party. And I said, that's not what I negotiated. Unless at the very top, people are prepared to say, I'm sorry, and this will not happen again. The apology was meaningless to me. I sued Mike Harris as the Premier. He retired, Ernie Eves became in, and then the Liberals won. And it's interesting, election eve at 11:15, Fraser Green called me up and said, the Premier-elect has asked me, will you give us 3 months? He will apologize. And the day he apologized, he invited the victims and their families to come. They'd set aside a section of the legislature. He rose as the Premier and delivered one of the most powerful apologies I've ever heard. Then the NDP, then the Conservatives rose. Then he rose as a father and begged the indulgence of the legislatures to speak. He said that morning he sat at his kitchen table, looked at his 12-year-old son, closed his eyes and cried, realizing that could have been his son there. He apologized as a Catholic, and as a father, he cried in the legislature, how could we ever let this happen? They knew it, they could have prevented it, and they consciously chose not to. And he delivered, and I understand the power of the words, and the victims and the families that walked out of there that day found a sense of peace. Apologies to me are the absolute key and foundation of reconciliation and healing. If you can't get an apology, if you can't get people to acknowledge a wrong, then money, yeah, it's nice to have, it's nice to spend. Yeah, it's nice maybe if they buy you a house or they give you counseling. But if you can't get an apology, if you can't get someone to acknowledge how it's wrong.
And that apology, this is where I want to get to this part of the conversation, because
you want to know about the letter to the Pope?
he writes a letter to the Pope, and David decides he's going to go to Rome.
No, you're getting ahead of the story. Sorry, I wrote a letter to Pope John Paul II before we signed the reconciliation agreement.
While he was still
alive.
Still alive, yes.
And I delivered it to the papal nuncio, which is the Pope's ambassador in Ottawa. And he chastised me for making the contents of that letter public, and he asked for an apology public, although he did promise to forward it to Rome. A veil of silence, I never heard back from him. But I did hear two archbishops rise on Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Easter, and deliver an apology to victims and their families and their parishioners at High Mass. I also probably at that Mass, when I heard the Archbishop of Ottawa deliver probably the most validation I've ever heard. There was a woman in front of us with her son, or her daughter, and her husband. Daughter was about 4, and her daughter kept looking at me as I was crying during the Mass. It had been the first Mass I'd been to in 30 some odd years. And she kept asking her, Mommy, why is that man crying? And her mother would look back at me furtively. And there's a greeting portion where she turned to me and she looked at me, and you always wonder if what you do is worthwhile. And she said to me, she said, thank you and all your men for coming forward and sharing your story. You've made the world a safer place for my child. That was the first letter I wrote. And let's fast forward from 1989 to this year. And
you've done it again.
I did it again. A member of the executive helpline
But
passed
hang on,
away.
like when you write a letter to the Pope, what do you think is going to happen?
Who
Like,
the
it's
hell
not
knows?
Santa. Do you think you're going to get an answer? Well, honestly, I mean, you're one of the feistiest coots I know.
At least he didn't call me old.
And this is a very difficult. You understand that they've got to do what they're going to do on this. Did you think you'd get an answer? And what did you think you would get an answer?
I thought if there was any pope in history that would give me an answer, it would be this one.
Yeah. And so you.
And I wrote a letter, and I asked for an apology, not just for myself or for the 1,600 men from St. Joseph's and St. John's. I asked the following. I would like Pope Francis to deliver an apology to all Canadians for the abuse suffered by men, women, and children at the hands of religious and clergy. To all Canadians, because the cost to our society has been incredible. It's been in the billions of dollars. And I know it from the survey that was done of the victims from St. Joseph's and St. John's. You compared them to their siblings. Siblings go to university. These guys, grade 7 education. Incarceration, drug use, suicides, you name it. And I thought when they raised the reconciliation poll at UBC, one of the nails was for a kid that went to school with me at St. Joseph's, an incredible artist called Benjamin Chichi. And that, combined with the death of Jerry Sirwa, said, there's some unfinished business here, and that's the letter from the Pope. And so I wrote another letter. And I told them I was coming to Rome. I said, whether you respond or not, I'm coming to Rome. And if you don't respond to me, I'm going to deliver that letter to St. Peter's tomb every day for 7 days. And on the last day, I will leave a book written by Darcy Hinton called Boys Don't Cry. And I'm asking St. Peter, the apostles, Mary, Jesus, and Joseph to intercede on my behalf to get you to meet with me. That's the letter I wrote. I told them I'm coming. Whether you ask or not, I'm coming. I'm Don Quixote.
I'm gonna put a photo up here. and I want you to tell us about this photo. So you go to Rome, you weren't kidding. Whether they answered or not, you told the Pope, I'm coming. Tell us about this photo and what it means.
That's a bouquet of roses I took. They agreed to meet with me before I went, and they agreed that a week after I got there that I would meet with Father Zomer. And that was at the specific request of the pontiff, that will you meet with Father Zomer and discuss this with him? And the flowers, there are 14 white roses. Those 14 white roses represent the 12 apostles, Mary and Joseph, Jesus' parents. The 3 small red roses represent the men, women, and children abused. The large red rose represents Jesus Christ. And all the little baby's tears represent the tears of the victims and their families. And it's the symbol of the message that I was taking. Will you apologize? Will the apostles intercede? Will Mary intercede? Will Joseph intercede? Will Jesus intercede? And get Francis to meet with me? Will the church meet with me? And I was really stunned when they said they would.
But they, really? I mean, was it PR? I mean,
No.
You've got 7 days.
No, the reason Father Zomer didn't meet with me right away, and he's the head of the Pope's, the Pontifical Commission into the Protection of Minors. He is the Vice Chancellor of the Papal Gregorian University in Rome. He's a Jesuit. And he was in Thailand addressing a conference of Asian bishops who were dealing with the issues of child abuse in their diocese. And he just happened to be away. I told them when I was coming, and they went, holy shit, we don't have anybody that can meet with you until this guy gets back, so will you wait a week? I said, sure, I'm there, I'll go sightseeing. Rome is not a place to sightsee, it's full of ghosts. But the meeting I had with him was 4.5 hours long, 5 hours long, wide-ranging, open. He was there as a specific request of Pope Francis, and he said he had been instructed to talk to Pope Francis when he was done. That was the Saturday. So I'm leaving the following Monday, and I thought Sunday I can kind of relax and take it easy.
So you are going to now, I want to move them through this. I want to leave some time to talk about something special at the end here in Vancouver. Day 1, no Pope.
Not expected.
Day 2, no Pope.
Not expected.
Day 3, David, no Pope.
Not expected.
Day 4, David, no Pope.
Not expected.
How about day 5?
No, it was day 8.
Day 8. Talk to me about
day 8.
Tell them about day 8.
Day 8 I've already talked about. Day 9 is my last day in Rome.
This is the moment where you're supposed to, I mean, are you worried you're going to have to tell the victims that, did you feel you were coming back empty-handed?
No, I'd come to Rome, I delivered my message, I knew my message was going to be delivered directly to the Pope. Sunday morning I wake up early, first night in Rome that I actually slept like a baby. And at my age, you normally wake up in the middle of the night and go to the throne. And I slept like a baby, and I woke up about 6:45 in the morning, went downstairs to have breakfast. I'm 2 buildings away from the Vatican, and they're very elegant patrician concierge. Oh, I have a phone call, Mr. McCann, a message for you, but would you like to take the call? And I did, and he says, there's someone on the phone, and they said, we were wondering if at 11 o'clock this morning you can come to the gates on the left side of the Vatican. Someone would like to meet with you and talk to you further. And I thought, they have some more questions, you know, in terms of everything. So I show up at 11:30. There's a priest in a long brown robe, and we spent an hour and a half walking through the papal gardens. A lot of questions in terms about why are you here? What's your commitment to reconciliation? What do words, what do apologies really mean to you? It was almost like being grilled by a crown attorney before you're getting ready to testify in a trial. And an interesting conversation in terms of, I think it really it clarified, they were so precise, the questions, really clarified in my mind what the power of apologies really is. And on the way out, we're almost at the gate, you can see the Swiss guards. He says, by the way, here on this side this is Casa Marta, and Casa Saint Marta. And I said, oh, nice looking little 4-story building. I said, this is where the Pope stays. He doesn't stay at the papal apartments. Would you like to see it inside? I said, I'd love to.
Yes, and?
And we go. You've already heard the story.
I know. It's an amazing story.
We go inside, he shows me, and then he says, can I show you something else? And he takes me down the corridor, and he shows me what you saw on the screen. They don't have the video up right now, the picture up. And we go in, and there, right in front of me, is the statue of Mary, and underneath is the bouquet of roses. This is the Pope's private chapel. This is where he goes to pray every day when he wakes up. This is where he goes to pray before he sleeps. And I had a meeting in there in the chapel, and I promised not to talk about it publicly. But I will tell you, my message was delivered, the message that I took to Rome on behalf of myself, the 1,600 men who came forward, and the ones who didn't have the voice to come forward, and every Canadian, was delivered to Pope Francis.
I promise you, I have asked him so many times, and he stays true to his promise and that confidentiality. But you've delivered your message to the Pope. You've done it. You come back to Canada now, David, after this extraordinary thing. How do you feel now? Is it do you feel the way you thought you would?
Yes, I accomplished what I set out to, which was to deliver the message. I'd been told my request would be considered. It's interesting that, unbeknownst to me, before I said I was going, the Prime Minister showed up in Rome asking exactly the same thing 9 days after I was there. And I went down and had a meeting with the ambassador and talked to him about what I had discussed at the Vatican before I left. But when I came back, I had an incredible sense of peace in some regards, but incredible internal turmoil. I mean, the riches of the Vatican and the riches of the church, and seeing homeless people lying in the colonnades with the gates of St. Peter's locked and closed at night, really created incredible internal turmoil for me that I hadn't felt in years. And I was waiting for an answer, and I didn't get one. And it was a beautiful 111-year-old woman that helped me put all of those pieces together. And a couple of weeks ago, I emailed and said, I haven't heard from you. Is the same veil of silence there? Didn't hear back for about 10 days. And then my phone rings, and I pick it up. It's the papal nuncio in Ottawa. I have a message from the Vatican Secretary of State. We are working on this, you realize, and it's the most bureaucratic 45-minute phone call I've had in a long time. Never try and pin a diplomat down. Is he coming? Well, you realize there's all kinds of security issues and travel issues and accommodation issues, and where can you find appropriate venues? All the issues you know they're facing if they're trying to arrange something. And at the end of it, I said, look, if the Pope does come and deliver an apology, I want to make sure it includes the residential schools, but it includes everything else at the same time. This is an opportunity to help a lot of Canadians heal. And I said, but I will travel anywhere in Canada to an event that he offers an apology at. And the most telling answer was, you won't have far to travel.
Do you think?
So I thought, okay, that's a bureaucrat. So then I called somebody in Rome, and the second phone call, somebody said, well, there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and you might see them. And then I made the most telling phone call of all. Having worked in government and worked for intelligence organizations, you learn how to ask questions. So I called some friends and I said, who should I talk to if I wanted to find out if there was an upcoming papal visit? And some people just hung up the phone. But one person told me, they said, call this person in Ottawa. And I called up and I said, good morning, David here. Can you tell me how you're coming along with the security arrangements for the upcoming papal visit? They're coming along just fine. Who's this? I hung up the phone. And I called from a payphone. I actually found one in downtown Vancouver. I don't think I'd want to be that guy in Ottawa that has to, and actually it was a woman that would have to answer. But do I know for sure he's coming? No.
But
I know that the message has been delivered. I know it was received openly and graciously.
That's right.
And I pensively await.
And you did something, David, that, you know, that 12-year-old boy, I know could not have imagined. I'm sure could not have known that it would go to where it went. And in my final question for you before we wrap, I want to ask you how you could go from that 12-year-old boy and that just horrific moment and through all that loneliness and shame to the rage and the fight that you have. And anyone who would Google you now here in Vancouver or anywhere in North America will read about you and your 111 acts of just random kindness. You just now go and just do amazing things. What's this about?
What I learned in 1989 was that by helping others, you heal yourself. By helping people get counseling. I mean, to negotiate the first reconciliation agreement, it's an incredibly complex document. It has been used around the world, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Germany. Here in Canada, I know the Assembly of First Nations have used it as part of the reconciliation process. That was the first of its kind in the world. And in helping others heal and find a sense of peace, I learned by giving, you heal yourself. And when Mary Sr. passed away this last June at the age of 111, I used to talk to her probably once a day for an hour. Incredibly important lady in my life. She asked me to practice 111 random acts of kindness in her memory and publish them. And it's something I've been doing for years privately, but she asked me to publish them. And I have been amazed at the response I've gotten from people from what I've published on Facebook and what they saw on the front page of the Vancouver Sun. And I guess the message I want to say is, you can put the past to rest. You will never forget it. It will change you for the rest of your life, what happens to you. But you can find a sense of peace, you can find a sense of place, and you can find value in your life. And it's by giving to others that you get yourself.